So you have a machinery where a group of people in the deep state can basically print or borrow an infinite amount of money and spend it on a non-disclosed basis completely outside of the Constitution. And this allows them literally to run an entire planet by force.
Absolutely. And to do anything else with the money. That's how you get whole pallets of U.S. dollars sent to Iraq.
Right.
It's ridiculous. It's outrageous. And I've been outraged for a very long time.
Mr. Secretary, according to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the number one reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other. My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them? Finally, Mr. Secretary, after the last hearing, I thought that my office was promised a written response to my question regarding the 4 war games on September 11th. I have not yet received that response, but would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today, and then I do expect the written response to my previous question, hopefully by the end of the week.
The second question, I've forgotten what the second question was.
I think Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I appreciate the question. I appreciate your interest in our department's financial condition, and we are working very hard on that program. I've just come back recently.
I understand that you're working hard on it, but my question was, who has the contract? How long have they had that contract, and how much money have we spent on it?
In general, we spend about $20 billion in the Department on Information Technology Systems. The accounting systems are part of that. I can get you the exact number for the record of what we spend on our current, what we call legacy systems, and those that we're moving toward.
And who has the contracts?
That would be a multitude of individuals.
Could you name some, please?
Well, I think off the top of my head, well, I would rather not. I'd rather provide that for the record.
That's not privileged information, is it?
I'm sure it's not.
Well, please. Yeah. And we still have time, so please.
Well, what we're saying is the appropriation clause and the war powers clause in combination are not being enforced, and until and unless they are enforced, you're literally seeing a machinery that's going to destroy the planet.
Absolutely. So, I agree with you.
Right. And part of our challenge is to change that. It's going to take all of us, and not just in the United States, but globally.
The people of the United States have a huge responsibility to hold their government accountable, because all roads lead to Washington, D.C.
Right.
And if Washington, D.C. is messed up, then the rest of the world is so messed up.
The bank depository and all the financial servicing and other work is done through the New York Fed member banks for the U.S. government. So the U.S. government doesn't have its own bank accounts. It banks with all the New York Fed member banks, and the Exchange Stabilization Fund, its slush fund, is run by the New York Fed member banks as agent, and all of its information systems, unfortunately, now are run by the big defense contractors with those banks. And so it doesn't have information or financial sovereignty, and part of enforcing the Constitution is getting that back.
It absolutely doesn't have information sovereignty, and instead, what you've got is the Fed claiming its sovereignty,
right,
distinct and separate from the United States government.
I would say we have a few structural problems. Now, why is this important to you? So what happens if we don't enforce the Constitution, but in fact change it? Let me talk numbers, because since 1998, $40 trillion has disappeared in bailouts and missing money, and even more in quantitative easing. I could take this number, I could estimate it up to $100 trillion. So now they have $40 trillion, but that's not on the balance sheet. However, if you look at the law, our property, your property, my property, our retirement savings is on the balance sheet. So one of the things the Constitutional Convention is trying to do is to push a balanced budget amendment. Well, if we're going to balance the budget with our retirement savings and property on budget, but the $40 trillion they just stole off budget, guess what's going to happen?
Right.
Okay.
And the people pay the ultimate price as always. So our part of what we have to demand is that we want that money back. We want that money back for our infrastructure, for our children, for education, for everything that has gone undone and stolen.
So let me just make this point. People always say, oh, well, it's gone, we can't get it back. Not true. That's not true. That money went someplace, and now there are assets that exist. And the ownership interest in those assets can be back on the table.
Well, they should be back on the table. And this is what partially got me into trouble, is that then I said, okay, well, let me start calling names.
Right.
And it's very important for us to call names, because if you make it a charge or an attack and it's not a direct hit, it goes over people's heads.
Right.
And so you've been engaged in this conversation for 30 years.
Right.
I've only started the conversation last year, or maybe some people started it in 2001 with September 11th.
Right.
So there's a whole body of knowledge out there that I don't have. So really, you don't have the luxury of trying to educate me by going over my head. If you really want me to get it, you got to hit directly. And that's why calling names becomes important.
Okay, which brings us to our next topic, slug management. So I
just pour salt on mine.
One of my simple constructs is that in any community, in any country, in any organization, any business, 10% of the people are what I would call net energy plus. They give more than they take. Those are your entrepreneurs, so you're net energy plus. Then 80% are followers. They just follow around whoever is in charge. They're busy, they're having kids, they're doing whatever. Some of us go back and forth between being followers and net energy plus. And then you have a group I call the net energy minus, and my nickname for them are the slugs. The slugs always drain. And some of the slugs are scorpions, which mean they enjoy draining. They enjoy busting things. They enjoy breaking things, making them not work. And the slugs will always be with us. And I grew up in a neighborhood in West Philadelphia, and it was a very multiracial, multicultural, multi-religion. But all the different people, the net energy plus people, could figure out who each other was, and they would organize to do slug management very quietly because they could cut off the slug's money. But then when government money and the drugs came in, the net energy plus people lost the ability to cut off the slug's money. The rich and powerful slugs figured out how to use, sort of the local slugs. So part of our problem is slug management, because basically what we've done is we've allowed a group, networks of people, to get the bit in their teeth, and they are running a system where they're centralizing power and political and economic power, and it's shrinking the total pie. But they don't care because they're slugs.
They don't care one whit.
Right.
So now it's interesting that we're having this discussion, because I introduced a new word to my political science students, and that word is kakistocracy. So that is leadership, governance by the least qualified, the most corrupt, the most vile kinds of personalities are the ones that are able to claw their way to the top.
Right.
And so this phenomenon of kakistocracy then led me to consider the entire scenario in a republic is that I'm a sovereign individual and I take my sovereignty and I give it to someone else, and then I beg them, please do this for me, please do that for me.
Right.
And so maybe built into that particular power configuration is this inability to control the slugs.
Right. So let's talk about a very important thing. You said we got to name names. So let's talk about who the slugs are. And they're different, they're different constructs. One, you have this construct of the Pilgrims and the Ziocons, which I think is very useful and very interesting because you're basically targeting two power groups. So the Ziocons is a mixture of Zionists and neocons, and then the Pilgrims are like the old line wasps. And we've seen power bounce around back and forth between these two groups. And there's no doubt about it. Part of what we're watching is a sort of integrated merger of the Pilgrims and the Ziocons. I call them the neocons, but we're looking at this merger, and at the root of it, it's basically an organized crime model. But I would say, and the reason I use the term Scorpio, to me, they are demonic. And so, I don't know if you've ever seen the movies Eyes Wide Shut, but these are people who go off and, they do Luciferian. So we're talking about some pretty perverted stuff here. But maybe if you could just say a few words about the Ziocons and the Pilgrims and what you saw in 12 years in Congress.
Well, I came up with the Pilgrims and the Ziocons because I was trying to understand what I was witnessing and what I was experiencing when I was in Congress. And there was that level of contention that was going on for who's actually going to control the reins of the state and all of the powers of the governing apparatus of the United States of America. What I believe is that there was a point at which the Pilgrims and the Ziocons, they shared a mission.
Right.
Now, according to Dr. Peter Turchin, who comes up with this idea of cliodynamics, where he tries to mathematize history. So he says that at one point you have a united deep state. Then the apparatus of the state is incapable of satisfying in periods of boom all of the power demands of every individual that's in the deep state.
Right.
So then that's when you see the factionalization taking place. So this is where we are, I believe, now.
When I say the debt growth model is over, what I'm saying is the spigot of infinite free money is over. And now, I call it the Midianite thing. The fighting is beginning because there's not enough juice to satisfy all the criminals.
That's right.
Okay, so I have a very famous story where I was in a meeting with Jack Kemp, and Jack Kemp said, the law, I don't have to obey the law. I report to something higher, And what he was implying is, if you watch again Eyes Wide Shut, that there's this group of secret societies, and they are above the law. Mm-hmm. And we saw...
Well, we've seen that. Why isn't Hillary Clinton before the ICC? Why isn't she even before the New York courts? Why is she... this is a woman who is a serial criminal.
Right.
And yet, as you say, crime that pays is crime that stays.
Right. So let's give an example of some of the people. So some of the neocons are pretty much named, but if you look at Congress, the Ziocons are in full blossom. So I'm thinking of Lindsey Graham. I'm thinking of John McCain. I'm thinking of Chuck Schumer. One thing I'll give Chuck Schumer credit, he explained the issue. He got on TV and basically said the president can't buck the intelligence agencies because they'll get you.
That's right. I don't think 24 ways to Sunday
to get you.
Yeah.
And what Chuck Schumer was saying was, we're not obeying the Constitution because the president does not. If you look at the powers and authorities of the president, he doesn't have any of that. He does what he's told by the intelligence agencies, which is in fact how it's been working since since they shot John F. Kennedy, in
Yes.
broad daylight. Now, I have a theory, and that is the Pilgrims, when I sort of started moving up the system, the Pilgrims were in control, but they used the Ziacons to do their dirty tricks. And, if they wanted wholesale criminality to pool a lot of capital, they would use the Ziacons to do it.
Well, then that was their slug management.
Right.
And then something happened.
Right. Well, you'll see throughout history, whenever you depend on somebody to operationalize it, at some point they lever up their power. So we go through the bailouts, suddenly, $27 trillion gets stolen, and suddenly the Ziacons are no longer doing the dirty tricks. They're at the table.
That's right.
Right. Well, part of it is in 95, it was made very clear to me that the Pilgrims decided they were giving up on the country. They were pulling all their money out. That was part of the financial coup d'etat and getting all the money out. The question, of course, where are you going to go? The other thing I wanted to do is talk about the role of Israel. There was, I think in the 90s, one of the head of the FBI said that Israel was the greatest threat to national security of this country. But what we're watching within the Ziacons, there's a very strong relationship between the Ziacons and Israel's governmental capacity, so the Mossad and the defense industry, everything. But we are watching an explosion of government officials, politicians, people in the military who have dual citizenship.
Yes, and it's a problem. Under Putin's leadership, the Duma passed a rule saying that no Duma member could have dual citizenship. So you're at least loyal to Russia if you're going to serve, in quotation marks, Russia. So the situation is not the same in the U.S., and therefore we can get someone like a Rahm Emanuel who served with me and then who organized to make sure that I was kicked out of the Congress while he was in charge of the DCC, that served in the Israeli Defense Forces, but not in the U.S. military.
Well, the one I'm thinking of is Dov Zakheim, who was instrumental in the undocumentable adjustments at the DOD and sort of papering it over. And again, dual citizenship. Here's why this is all important. What you're talking about is, with both the Pilgrims and the Ziacons, is getting a relatively small group of people together, and through the federal credit mechanism and the subversion of the war clause, giving them the machinery that gives them the ability to institute violence under the rule of law globally on a non-transparent basis.
Right, on a non-transparent basis. But I say that the Ziacons don't care about the survival of the U.S. Why else would they push war against Russia? Maybe Russia, China, and Iran and Hezbollah together, and the United States can't win that war and shouldn't even fight it.
But if the U.S. and Russia destroy each other,
right, then they are ascendant.
Be it from Israel or wherever. So
That's
so
right.
They've got a place in mind, but they all have second passports.
That's right.